Thank you for being patient with the countdown. They say you should always check your equipment before you start. And so pardon me that we didn't get that checked ahead of time. But I'm so glad you're here. We've got a full house. My goodness. It's a pleasure to be here today because I love talking about my experiences. And so we'll do a little talk about my experiences in the space program and a little bit afterwards as the book came available. I'm going to tell you a little bit at the end about how the book happened, because I think if you're in a library, you're interested in books, and you always kind of wonder, how did that come about? So we'll talk a little bit about that, and I will give you a little time afterwards for questions and answers. And so be thinking about the things that you might like to know that I don't talk about. I began my life down the road in Murfreesboro, believe it or not. Small town girl. Some of you may remember what Murfreesboro was like. Franklin was kind of like that back in the 50s. And I had a perfect, 50s upbringing. This is me. I'm the older of the two girls. And I'm 6 years old. And I'm cutting out doll clothes. I think looking back on it that my mother was very brave, that she let me handle the scissors at this point in my life. That's my little sister next to me. And little did she know that skill in using scissors might be helpful later on in life. And this is something that changed my life. For those of you who were around in the late 50s, I guess, when I was 10 years old, this happened. This is Sputnik. This is the world's first satellite. And the Russians had sent it up into space, 1958, I believe. And my daddy took me out in the backyard, and he said, I want you to see something. And we watched that little satellite blip across the sky. It was very obvious what it was. It was moving too fast to be an airplane, and it was moving. It was not a star. And he explained to me that that was the beginning of something called the space age. And I think when you're that age and you think, I got in on the very beginning of this, and it will go forward in my lifetime, there's kind of a pull to be a part of it. And that's what I wanted to do. I thought, maybe someday I'll get to be part of the space age, the space program. And that was pretty unrealistic in the 1950s for a little girl in a small town in Tennessee. So I had to think, what else would I like to do? Because as they began to fly people in space in the 1960s, it was only men, and it was only jet pilots. And I didn't think I could be either one of those. So I had to plan my future, just around something that I was passionate about, something that I was good at, and something that I really loved. And that's when I decided that I wanted to go to medical school. But first, I had to find a college that was excellent and that was good in the life sciences. So I found one. It just happened to be 2,000 miles away, but my parents were very supportive, and that's how I ended up here. This is the University of California at Berkeley in the late 1960s. And some of you remember what a crazy place it was then. This is not students going to campus. This is students protesting the war in Vietnam. Or maybe it was free speech, or maybe it was equal rights for women. Whatever it was sort of the riot du jour. So here are all the students out there, and I'm trying to go to class through all of this. I'm a pre-med major. When it got like this, the school would cancel classes and tell everybody, just work on your stuff at home. Well, you can't do organic chemistry at home, or you probably shouldn't. So I had to make my way to campus. And when this got really crazy on certain days, they would call in the police. There would be police around the campus or National Guards people, and there would be helicopters overhead. And if it really got out of hand, they would just tear gas the whole campus. So it was a very interesting place. Remember, I went there from Middle Tennessee at age 17. So I got a really good education, not only in the life sciences, but in the developing United States and the way it was going. But it really, it was quite an experience, and it was kind of a miracle to me that I made it through. But I tell young people that, when you do something that you don't think that you could do, or that you hadn't planned to do, and you do it, you gain the confidence to say, well, if I can do that, maybe I could do this. And so, making it through college was a giant leap for me. So I got into medical school here at the University of Tennessee in Memphis. And, they decided the year I applied, they had really not let very many women into medical school at the time. And they decided that they would have a large group of women in my medical school class. Well, in a class of 100, they took 6 women. And that was just unheard of. 6 women out of 100. So that lets you know where things were back in the 1970s. And then I got crazy enough to really like surgery. Remember little Ray with her scissors? I was pretty good at stitching and cutting, and was pretty good at surgery. So I decided to be a surgeon, and I was the only woman they had ever taken in the surgery residency program. So again, living in a world of men, but doing some very exciting things and something that I felt passionate about. You could figure out what was wrong with somebody, operate on them, and send them home. So that was something I really enjoyed doing. In the meantime, my dad asked me what I had wanted since I graduated from medical school. He wanted to give me a gift. And I was working with a surgeon when I was in my training, and he's a plastic surgeon. So we were in cinching up a lady's skin up to the top of her head and working away. And he said, I have to finish this case because I got to fly my family to Florida this afternoon. And I said, oh, you have a plane? And he said, yeah, I do. And I said, oh, I've always wanted to take flying lessons. And he said, wow, that's cool. I own a flying school out at the Memphis airport. Come on out. I'll show you around. Which got me into an airplane. Loved it. Was a way to escape all the sick people on the weekends. And got about 100 hours of flying time in small planes and got my pilot's license because I was going to be a rich doctor. Now remember, they had still not taken women into the space program, so it was a men-only club. But I kind of thought maybe they'll want women someday on the space station to be doctors, so I'll be ready. Well, lo and behold, 1977, NASA announced that they were going to take a new group of astronauts, the first astronauts they had taken since the 60s when the Apollo program was going on. They decided they were going to take a group of people for the astronaut program to fly on the space shuttle, this new vehicle that was being put together and was going to fly soon. And for the first time, they were going to take women and minority applicants. Maybe. This is a big maybe in my life. Just one of those things that I'm thinking, I have good credentials, I think, and maybe I'll apply. Well, it turns out that in 1977, the requirements were that you had to have a college degree in science, math, or engineering with preferably an advanced degree, and you had to be in good health, you had to pass an interview and an application process. So I thought, I could apply. Maybe, my credentials are pretty good. Well, it turns out there weren't many women with advanced degrees in science back then. Women were not being pushed into science, and there weren't very many of us. So I was very lucky that I came along at just the right time, had the right credentials. Those flying lessons was just a little bit more help, I think. And so when they decided on people, they took 35 of us, 6 of us were women. The women who had interviewed together all decided that they would take maybe 1 or 2 women, and they couldn't just take 1 because it'd be kind of lonely. They'd probably just take 2, so they'd have somebody else to be with, and they took 6. So that was great. And all of us had different degrees in the sciences. Kathy Sullivan down on the end is a geologist, Sally Ride, an astrophysicist, Shannon Lucid, a biochemist, Judy Resnick, electrical engineer, Anna Fisher next to me was an emergency room physician, and I'm a surgeon. So it was wonderful to have a group of friends like this, and you can understand how we all bonded and helped each other and supported each other. And so it was a great group of people. The 35 of us all came in as a group, had a lot of fun together, trained together, did a lot of things together. We began our training in 1978, just as I was finishing my residency. So it was a good timing for me, too. Things sometimes just all work out to be the right thing at the right time. And for me, that happened. So we began our training. We had to do training in the sciences that we were going to fly on the shuttle. We had to do training in the photography, the cameras we would use on the shuttle. We had to do scuba training. People say, why? It's because if you're training for a spacewalk in the big space suits, you train in a water tank. And if your suit floods, you have to be able to breathe off the scuba equipment that the safety diver brings to you. That was a challenge for me. But you know, people say, was the training hard? And I say, well, it wasn't so much the training that was hard, it was being small. Because I don't think NASA had really thought about it when they set the height requirements, and they hadn't modified a lot of the equipment. And I was the smallest, as you can see, that they had ever accepted. So it was kind of interesting to go through things and realize that I can't use that equipment the same way as taller people can. I'll just have to adapt. And so I did, and so it worked out. One of the things we had to learn to do was to fly in the back seat of the NASA jets. We were not trained as fully rated pilots, but we flew in the back seat, and we were trained by the other astronauts that came in with us who were pilots. And we first learned to use all the communication and the navigation equipment so we could be helpers in the back seat, learning to be a part of a flight crew. You can imagine if you're about to fly on the space shuttle, it would be nice to understand how you can be helpful in flying the aircraft. So we began to fly these. The pilots learned quickly that we were anxious to get a little, as they say, stick time to fly the airplane. So they let us do as much flying as we were capable of. NASA decided it would be best if we didn't do the takeoffs and landings, so we didn't, but they let us fly as much as we could. Another airplane that we flew in is this thing. It's a KC-135 that flies up and down like a roller coaster. And at the top of every hill, you get 30 seconds of weightlessness. Of course, when you dive down and get at the bottom, you're 2 times gravity. So you're sort of mashed out on the floor like a worm. It starts climbing up again, and you get 30 seconds. And if you can break everything down into 30-second segments, like experiments you're going to do or spacewalks that you're planning, you can practice it. It's really the only way that we could practice weightlessness. But as you can imagine, this bothered some people, and that's why it was called the Vomit Comet. Because up and down, up and down, up and down. Would do about 60 parabolas in a flight. Great fun. We got to learn a lot of things about weightlessness, certainly about motion sickness, but it was one of the things that we trained in as astronauts. But of course, you know, sometimes we just goofed off. And this is in the zero-G plane. This is not space, but this is in the back end of the zero-G plane. And as the smallest astronaut, you know, I found that weightlessness becomes the great equalizer. You can lift things, you can get things off the ceiling if you want to. A lot of fun. Just so happened this was another member of the class that came in with me in 1978, one of the pilots, and we had done some flying together. He was a really nice man, kind of cute, Navy pilot, and interestingly enough, he became my husband. And we produced the world's first Astronaut. That was a term that the press used when Paul was born. An Astronaut is a child born to 2 astronauts. It's a very exclusive club. I think there are fewer than 20 of them, but I have 3 of that 20. So this is the first one, and it was pretty exciting to have a baby in the midst of all of this craziness that I was going through with the training. But it worked, and if you decide you want to do that and you can manage to do it, I can recommend it. I was finally assigned to a crew. In the first years that I was at NASA, I did a lot of training, and then I helped other people get ready for their flights, learned a lot about how things would be put on board, how you train, what the mission was about, how mission control worked, learned all about how it would be when I finally got to fly in space. And I was assigned to a flight in 1983 that was supposed to fly in 1984, ended up flying a little bit later than that. But here it is, and any flight is a good flight, especially your first flight. And yet this one was going to be pretty boring. This was the 16th flight of the space shuttle. Sally and Judy had already flown. We had already launched some of the satellites like we're going to be on this mission, so that wasn't new. We had some science to do, but the press wasn't really interested in science. There was one really exciting thing going to happen on the mission that the press all focused on, and that is right here. That is Senator Jake Garn. He is the first politician in space. He's from Utah. Luckily, he had some piloting experience, but more importantly, he was the chairman of the committee that gave NASA its money. So he had been asking, you know, if there's ever a seat available, I'd like to go. So they put him on this mission, and that's what the press focused on, really. And in fact, a lot of people focused on it. Are you familiar with the cartoon series Doonesbury? Gary Trudeau did a whole series of cartoons about Barfin' Jake Garn because he volunteered to do motion sickness studies. We know that about 2/3 of astronauts get sick when they first go into space. And so Jake said, I've never been sick, but you're welcome to study me, and you know, maybe you'll learn how people don't get sick, but that's okay. So he became Barfin' Jake Garn, and that was the real press focus of the flight. Well, we did finally launch. It ended up being April the 12th, 1985. But April the 12th is an auspicious date. April the 12th, 1961 is the day Yuri Gagarin, the first person in space, launched. April the 12th, 1981 was the day that the first space shuttle launched. So we felt like April the 12th, even though we were going to have a pretty boring flight, nobody paid much attention to us, it was an auspicious date. Well, we go into space, and people often ask, what was launch like? It's like sitting on top of an explosion. That's 4.5 million pounds of explosives, and somebody lights the fuse. Lots of vibration, lots of acceleration, noise. It just feels like the whole back end of that thing blew up. But, you know, after a few seconds, you realize we're still moving, and we're moving in the right direction, which is up, and maybe we're okay. But by the time you clear the launch tower, just like a second after this, you're going over 100 miles an hour. So it is an amazing event when it happens. The boosters are amazing. They put a lot of vibration on the vehicle. So the first 2 minutes, it's really rocking and rolling and shaking. But when the boosters come off, the main engines push you for another 6 minutes, 6.5 minutes, and then you're on orbit. And that part of the flight is very smooth. But you can imagine 8.5 minutes after you leave the ground, the engine's cut off, and suddenly everything is weightless. And you'd be amazed what happens, because things that weren't tethered down float up. If you didn't tether your pencil, it goes off somewhere. There are nuts and bolts that come from behind the panels that people have dropped and they didn't know about. Here they come floating out. The little dust particles are just shimmering, and everybody's just kind of like in awe that we're finally here. We have survived the launch, and we are weightless for what we thought was going to be a 5-day flight. So we began our mission. This is the second of the 2 satellites that we launched. For those of you who were here earlier and got to see the video, this is how it pops out of the cargo bay. It's like a Frisbee. We release it, we power it up, we release it, and it throws out like this, like a Frisbee. The idea being that once it's launched, it has a timer on board, and in 2 minutes it will begin spinning faster, so it's gyro stabilized and points in the right direction. The antenna will pop up, and the booster is armed because 45 minutes after this, on the other side of the Earth, a booster on this satellite is going to send it into a higher orbit. So that's the sequence. We're watching for this thing out the window to spin up. But it just drifts away from us, slowly rotating, and it doesn't spin up. So we call the ground and say, CENTCOM has not activated. Well, we knew that we had done everything we were supposed to. The ground was supposed to command it once that antenna came up, and it didn't. So here's the satellite that we think is useless. This is the second day of our flight, and we're thinking, well, not only is this flight not interesting, but it's not going very well. Well, as it turns out, the ground had some ideas. So a day and a half later, they came up and said, we think that there's a way you can turn that satellite on. We think that the only single point failure on the satellite is when it popped out of the cargo bay. There's a little switch on the bottom, and when it comes out, that switch is supposed to pop up and turn the thing on. Everything else inside has a backup system. So we think that's the problem with it. The little switch didn't get all the way to the on position. So what we're going to get you to do is design some little instruments here that we call the fly swatter and the lacrosse stick. And we want you to go snag that switch on the side of this satellite. That satellite is 15 tons and it's 15 feet in diameter. And it's got a big explosive booster in the bottom of it. And so our commander, Bo Bobko, kept asking, have you made sure everything is safe? Have you made sure everything is safe? And they said it was. But remember, we had not planned to do a spacewalk on this mission. 2 people on every flight are trained to be able to go out in the cargo bay and strap things down or, you know, make some adjustments if they need to, but they hadn't really been trained on doing a formal spacewalk. But we said, but the ground said, 2 of them will go out and attach these things to the end of the robot arm. And I'm the robot arm operator. And I'm thinking, I wasn't trained to do that. Certainly not, you know, something that's that size that's going to be right there in my face. And that wasn't the hard part. The hard part was our pilot and commander were going to have to rendezvous with that satellite. And they had only had very basic rendezvous training more than a year prior. And so the ground was going to have to walk them through that and teach them, tell them how to do all that. This was all information that was going to come up to us from the ground. And as you can imagine, that was a lot of information. And we were working with a teleprinter machine back then. It's not like they could do a computer upload and we could print it out. This was a long roll of paper that began to spin down on the middeck area with lots of lines of text. And that's all that we had to tell us how to do all of this. But we did. So here is the end of the robot arm over here, sticking out. And you remember what that satellite looked out like when we popped up? When we rendezvoused on it, we thought that was going to be what it looked like. Well, what's that? That's the booster nozzle. So right there in our face is a thing that can incinerate us. If something is wrong and we flip that switch, turn things on, and it, you know, ignites ahead of time. And we kept asking the ground, have you checked to make sure this is all safe? And they said it was. And what we're aiming at is a little finger-like projection. You can barely see it, about that long. And we're going to try to hit it with these devices. As it slowly rotates around, we're going to try to knock it and put it in the on position. We did all those things. It didn't turn on, didn't spin up. Luckily, it didn't blow up. And we had to back away from it. Luckily, a crew went up the next year and hot-wired around the internal electronics and got it on its way. So it was not a total loss. The ground thought we would be upset. It didn't get turned on. You've been in the press. Everybody's been watching. You know, are you disappointed? No. We did everything you told us to do that we had not been trained on before. We all didn't blow up. And, you know, we're just happy we're coming home safe. And we had an exciting flight. People read about us in the press. They forgot about Barfin Jake Garn. In fact, you know, they sort of forgot he was on the flight. But we had a good flight. It was a lot of fun. It involved mission control. Anytime mission control has a big task, like on Apollo 13 or some of the other missions that you've seen that have had failures, they have lots and lots of fun trying to do repairs with, you know, whatever equipment you have on board, and to try to get the crew trained to do it. In any event, I had 2 more shuttle flights. This is my second crew. My second and third flights were all life sciences missions. It was the first time that NASA had shuttle missions or any missions dedicated entirely to life sciences. They had had missions that had life sciences and materials processing and astronomy and geology and a bunch of stuff. But this is the first time it was all life sciences, and this is the flight that I always hoped to make when I got to NASA. And here we are. There are 3 physicians in the front row, and sitting next to me is Millie Hughes-Fulford, a biochemist. In the back is the flight crew, pilot, flight engineer, and commander, flight engineer, and pilot. And we all get these formal pictures made. We wear the big orange suits after the Challenger accident in case we think we can get out of the shuttle if something goes wrong. But we look very formal, right? Well, in the NASA archive someplace are some pictures that you have probably never seen, because crews usually have an informal picture made. And here's ours. If you're all doctors and you're all there together, what does it become? It becomes a MASH unit. And of course, you recognize, for those of you who don't remember MASH too well, of course, with a name like Ray, I get to be Radar. I was sort of happy I didn't have to be Hot Lips, Father Houlihan, the Colonel, the surgeon's patient. And guess who chose the short straw when they needed to find someone to be the cross-dresser? This is Dr. Gaffney, an eminent cardiologist, and he's Klinger the cross-dresser, for those of you who remember. In any event, we had a lot of fun staging this, getting pictures, and it's fun to have that in our collections to show that we were having fun while we were doing good work. This is my third crew. We are a crew of 7, and on, let's see, here and here, Jay Bucky and Dr. Larry Young are our backup payload specialists. We had mission specialists, a couple of payload specialists, and then we had the backup payload specialists in case we needed to replace a crewman. The others of us, again, are the flight crew. Down here is something interesting. This is Dr. Marty Fettman, the first veterinarian in space. We took some rats on this mission, and they felt it would be good to have a veterinarian to monitor the rats' health. In any event, again, a formal picture, a little less formal because we've got on our shirts, striped shirts, but again, all sitting nice and informally. And of course, as you would expect, we also had to have an informal picture. And because we were the longest space shuttle flight to date, 14 days, and because this was a mirror of the first flight, there were people that came up with all kinds of good ideas of other things that we could do on this mission that would help them understand what had happened on first. So we were packed to the gills with all kinds of equipment. So what did we become? The happy campers. And we have all of our fun equipment and everything, and of course some of the medical experiments are being made fun of. But you know, a large group of us, again, having a really good time. And this, of course, is Space Lab. It's a laboratory module that sits in the cargo bay of the space shuttle. This is the lab itself. There's a long tunnel that leads from the crew quarters down to the lab. The lab itself is 15 feet in diameter, the diameter of the payload bay, and about 23 feet long. Lots and lots of room for equipment like freezers and animal habitats and all kinds of equipment to do the many experiments that we have on the flight. And you would think something that's that large, I mean, it is really like a laboratory, you'd think that there would be plenty of room on board. However, once you pull all the equipment out, you get all the people back there, it gets a little wild. One of the funny things that always happens is that the wires float. You know, in here, if you plug something in, the wires are down here on the floor. Well, up there, they just float unless you Velcro them down on the floor. So things get in the way. If something gets loose, it goes floating by you. It can be very distracting. The one good thing is that you can use all of the real estate. Notice that Millie is getting something out of a stowage locker that's up here on the ceiling. So you have access to everything up here. In fact, you can move your experiment from here and put it back in the back on the back wall. And so you get lots and lots of room to work. But we did all kinds of different sorts of studies on the human body primarily. We wanted to know what happens to the human body when gravity goes away. And this is a bike that we use for some exercise studies and some lung function studies. We did some blood pressure regulation studies when gravity is not exercising your blood pressure sensors. You know, when you stand up, your blood pressure drops a little bit. There's sensors in your neck that makes your heart speed up a little bit. But that gets out of whack in space. Your body forgets how to do that regulation. So there are a lot of things that we worked on. We know that people lose calcium from their bones. You know, people will tell you if you want to keep strong bones, you walk, you get exercise, because that helps the bones keep calcium. When we go into space, we know that astronauts lose a fair amount of calcium in their bones. Not enough to really worry us about space shuttle flights, but on a 1-year trip to Mars, you don't want the astronauts to step off the ladder and break their hip because their bone density is so low. Your muscles get weak, you fly everywhere. Kids are fascinated by the thought that you could just fly to the door if you wanted, or you could fly up to the ceiling if you wanted. So your muscles don't get that exercise, certainly not the muscles in your back and your legs. So we're losing a lot of protein from our muscles, and they wanted to quantify that. How much, how soon, does it level off? And most things, yes, and do level off at a different level. Unfortunately, the bone loss continues, and that's one of the problems that we're going to have if we send people to Mars on long duration flights. One of the systems in the body that people were very interested in was your vestibular system. Your balance and your sense of movement, they lie to you when you get into space. There's fluid in your inner ear here on the ground. And when you move or rotate, the little hairs in there sense the movement of the fluid. And it tells you, oh, you're moving, and you're moving that way. Or you just rotated this way. Or gravity's there. And when you go to space, that doesn't happen. The fluid in there just floats around. So you can't depend on your inner ear to tell you where you are. You become much more dependent on your eyesight. So we have to keep our eyes open or we get lost. And this is an experiment with a chair that rotates around that's looking at how does the inner ear deal with this and what happens inside your head when you're in space. These are the rats that we took. We have an enclosure. You see a workbench that's enclosed in glass with some arm ports in it. You'll see the little rat up there. He kind of matches the gloves we're using. But we took rats on my second mission just to make sure that the cages worked properly, that the animals stayed watered and fed and were healthy. And then on my third mission, we actually did experiments on the rats that were very much like what we did on the humans. But of course, you can carry more rats into space than humans. So it gave us a larger number. But the rats are good models for human certain systems, but not others. Rats walk around on 4 feet, so their blood pressure regulation, their heart function a little differently. So we wanted to find out, if we test the rat and it shows this, is that what's going on in humans? Are they good models? So this was the first time that we had ever been able to do that in space. And so we brought back a lot of information that we never have gotten. And in fact, they never put the animal cages and the workbench on space station. So unfortunately, we're not getting more information from space station. So, we feel like that's very important information that we have been able to bring back. We do get a chance to look out the window. And you can imagine that, you have the feeling that you're just sort of drifting in a hot air balloon around the world. And you think, oh, that's so beautiful, I'll just watch that for a minute. Well, you better get your camera ready if you want to get a good picture. We crossed the United States in 9 minutes. So if you say, oh, there's San Francisco Bay, let me get my camera. Well, you get to take a picture of Chesapeake Bay on the other side of the United States. But that's okay. But we get gorgeous pictures. This one is one of my favorites because it reminds me of a story. When I was little, my grandmother used to read me Bible stories. And she would tell me about bad old Pharaoh and Moses and how they wandered around and then they found the Promised Land. Well, this is that story. This is the Nile and the Nile Delta. And of course, this is where old Pharaoh ruled and where his daughter pulled Moses out of the bulrushes. And then this is where Moses and his people wandered in the desert for 40 years. And over here, a little green area. Get my finger right. This is Israel and the Promised Land where Jesus walked. So that's that whole story in that one picture. And it's amazing that you could wake up in the morning and go over and look out the window and there it is, all that stuff that you heard about when you were little. But remember, the Earth, we went around the Earth every 90 minutes, just like the space station does now. But that's the way that things work if you're in low Earth orbit. Go around the Earth every 90 minutes, so you get 45 minutes a day, and then you get 45 minutes of night. And you would think that wouldn't be very interesting to look at the Earth in darkness. But indeed, it is gorgeous because you get to see things like this. And there's some places that are so recognizable because of their shape, and the place that's shaped like a high-heeled boot is Italy, and Sicily, the island off the toe of the boot, like it's kicking it away. But you can pick out the cities, right? You know, when you look at a place like this, you think, you know, probably Naples, Rome, Venice is up here, Florence is probably there. You know, and you can see the Balkans, not as many people, and into the, you know, into the eastern part of Europe, but it's gorgeous. And then look up here. This is odd, isn't it? Looks like the Earth has a halo, but it's the air molecules, it's the atmosphere, that thin rim that protects us from the blackness of space. And you do see a few stars. Unfortunately, the shuttle and the station have a lot of light, reflected light, so you can't see as many stars as you can if you can darken everything. But it is absolutely gorgeous. It's sometimes hard to get away from the window and go back to work. When we bring the shuttles home, the workers on the ground said, man, there were a lot of nose prints on those windows. And that's because we spent a lot of time looking at the Earth. Whoops. Time to come home. I spent 7, 9, and 14 days in space. And coming home was pretty exciting too, because of course you start out up above the Earth's atmosphere. As you enter the Earth's atmosphere, the air molecules flow around you and heat up. So it feels like you're flying through a fireball. You don't feel it inside because we're all well protected by our thermal protection system. But it is pretty frightening as you come back in through it. And of course the shuttle was a glider. It has no jet engines, no propellers, so it's a glider. So it really dove at the Earth at a kind of a freakish speed until right before landing, about 1,400 feet above the ground. It leveled off, threw out the gear, and landed. So it was always a little bit exciting to hope that the commanders were well practiced and that they were going to finally pull that thing out there at the last minute. But sometimes if you were landing, if you happened to be up on the flight deck landing, you could look out the window and you could see your family or the bleachers where the families would sit. This is my second flight. We're landing at Edwards Air Force Base in the desert, and they let the families come out to the end of the runway to watch the landing. And this is one of my favorite pictures. There's my 2-year-old in his little flight suit watching Mama come home. And I like that one so much it's on the back of my book, because my husband took it. It's got my 2-year-old and me in it, and it was an awesome moment. Believe it or not, he still remembers that. This is after my husband's last flight, and just wanted you to see that, you know, these are the kids that were in the middle of all that. My stepdaughter here on the left, Julie, is a gorgeous girl. The little boy that was 2 is here. He is 5. Paul is the first astronaut, and Emily was born right before my husband's last flight. Had to go down to the Cape, 3 weeks post C-section. So it was kind of interesting to do that, but had a lot of help holding the baby. In any event, we were all glad. We knew this was going to be his last flight, and it was good to know that we had all made it through all those flights safely, and we were back together again. Hoot and I had the opportunity to have 8 flights together. I made 3, he made 5. Of course, I had 3 babies along the way. But we had the opportunity to have 8 different crews to train with. When you are on a flight crew, you get immensely close to the families and the people that you are with. Our children played together, our kids grew up together. We all had to work together endless hours. The spouses were always supportive. So, that was one of the best things about NASA. People say, do you miss flying? Kinda, but I mostly miss the people. Some of the best and finest people that I've ever known. Not only the people that were on the crew, but the people that worked at NASA to get us ready, to take care of us, helped us in mission control, made sure that all our equipment was together, and saw us safely home. So that was one of the best things. I did leave NASA in 1996, came to work at Vanderbilt, was there for 11 years, helping to adapt some of the skills that flight crews use to prevent pilot error to help doctors and nurses help prevent healthcare errors. So it was kind of a nice blend of my medical and my space careers. In fact, it was so successful in preventing patient error at Vanderbilt that we formed a company called LifeWings that I'm a founding partner of that is still working today in hospitals all across the country to help them prevent the errors that hurt patients. But there came a time when I wanted to stop and finish my book. You probably can't see how this book started. The date on that is 12 of 93. This is 1993 when I sat down with a bunch of legal pads and began to write just whatever I could remember. I knew that we were only going to stay with NASA 2 or 3 more years, and I wanted to be able to capture some of this, if for no other reason than to hand the legal pads to my kids and so they could read about it. So in 1993, I started scribbling. Scribbled on family vacations, scribbled when the kids were at camp, scribbled in the carpool lane, scribbled and scribbled and scribbled. It was a terrible sort of thing. It was just a chronology. But I was lucky enough to find the right people that could help me turn it into a story. I did take a writing course. Middle Tennessee State had something called the Writer's Loft. It was a mentored program. You went first, you went for a couple of days at the beginning of the semester, and then the rest of the semester, once a month, you provided a packet of your writing to a mentor who would critique it. And it was supposed to be a 3-semester program. I asked them if I could stay a little longer so I could get all of that stuff on the computer, mostly. So it took me 5 semesters, but I did get my certificate in writing, and I turned, with the help of a published author, turned that chronology into a story. What I thought was a pretty good story. And I was asked to write some excerpts and some children's books and some things. There was a man that in, I think it was 1993, asked if he could feature me in his literary journal, because he had been involved with the Writer's Loft. And I said, I haven't really written anything yet. The book's not published. He says, that's okay. I'd like to chronicle the writer's journey. How do people get their book written? And I said, fine. And he said, would you just send me an excerpt of your book? And so I sent him a short excerpt. He read it, and he said, okay, would you mind if I edited it a little bit? And I said, okay, because this is just an article for his magazine. So he did. And his wording was so nice. He just fancified my wording, really. He didn't change the story. There were certain things that he said, I don't understand this, which meant I needed to make the writing a little simpler. But he did such a great job, I asked if he would edit the whole book, which he did. So again, getting help with something like this is so important. And then there was the book, and it was all improved and on the computer and sitting there. Had no idea what I was going to do with it next. Well, then I had an epiphany. And that's the group that Stephanie works with, Epiphany Creative Services in Nashville. I happened to be introduced to her. I gave a talk someplace, and someone said, have you written a book? And I said, yes, I have. And he said, well, where is it? And I said, I have no idea what to do with it. And he said, I think I have somebody who can help you. Epiphany Creative Services helps people take a book from an idea to a published book. And so Stephanie and her folks, good folks, all with different specialty areas, have helped me take the book into something that was just all written out, into something permanent that you can get a hold of. And of course I had to first, if you're going to self-publish, which is what I decided to do, you have to have a publishing company, which is really just, says who published it. And so this is my publishing company. If you know, this is the astronaut symbol. It is the shooting star through an orbit. And as you can see, I modified it slightly with the Williamson. But anyway, you get creative. I had to use a different part of my brain when I became a writer. And this is the book. And this is the book I brought with me today. It's doing quite well. We've gotten some really nice reviews of it. I think it's a good book. It's a heavy book. It's a book. It's not a little book. And if you can't lift 2 pounds, then you'll have to have somebody help you. And people have asked me, how did, this is me in space. They said, how did you know the title of your book in 1985? And I said, oh, have you ever heard of anything called, what is it now? Yeah, Photoshop. My brain's quit here. Photoshop. If you find the right person, he can take something that looks like this into something that looks like that. So it's been a real journey, but I can recommend writing stuff down. I didn't start out to write a book. I just wanted to tell my kids what was going on all the time that you were growing up, and you thought those trips to Florida were just to go to the beach. Remember, you went out and watched Mom go, and they'd ask really naive questions. And it made me wonder, if I'd been able to talk to my mother before she died and just asked her to write me a letter about what it was like growing up, or ask my daddy what it was like, starting a business. It would have been so wonderful to have those things, even if they were just written out longhand. And so I try to encourage people, you don't have to publish a book, but write your story down, just the simple things about what it was like growing up. What do you think your kids would ask you? Or if your kids ask your parents, would you just write 3 paragraphs about what it was like growing up in Middle Tennessee in the 60s? What was your life? Why did you make that decision? How did you meet your husband? How did you meet your wife? What were the struggles that you had? If you have a chance, just do that, because it will be so much appreciated by your children, your grandchildren, and people that you will never know. So I can encourage you to do that. I'm going to answer your questions now. I've babbled on long enough. What can I answer for you? Yes?
It looks like on your second mission, there were 7 people. On the third mission, there were 9 people. Did they just bolt on a couple more chairs and ask more people?
No.
It looks pretty crowded.
The question was, it looked like there were 9 people on my third flight. 2 of them were backups. They stayed home.
Oh.
They were in the science equivalent of the mission control. There was a payload control center. When we began to have problems with any of the experiments, our backup people who had trained with us and knew everything we knew were there to help the scientists try to reconfigure things. So we really only took 7 to space. Other questions? Yes?
Do you have to sit up when you get on a rocket ship, or do you have to sit on a video like this?
Yeah. You have to, that question was, do you have to sit up when you launch on a rocket ship? Well, the space shuttle, if it's on the ground, if it's on its wheels, it's like this, right? Well, when they put you on the side of the shuttle, it's like this. So really, your chair gets turned sideways. So you launch with your feet up in the air, sitting on a chair sideways. And that's the way that you fly. That's the way you get there. When you're coming home, it's like an airplane coming home. So you are sitting up.
But I have one more question.
Okay, one more.
On your rocket ship, did you see any aliens?
Did I see any aliens? It's a secret. But no, I didn't see any aliens. Yes, ma'am.
How many rats on the rocket that you guys had rats? How many were there?
There were 48 of them.
Wow.
So we had all kinds of little cages, and we looked in every day to make sure they were healthy. One of the problems with the rats, we got to orbit, and of course we had to look at them every day to make sure that they were okay. So the first day we opened the cage, and the rat is holding on to his cage, looking at us like that. And we thought, oh dear, I hope they're able to get around and get their food and everything. And by the second day, they're sort of looking at us kind of like, okay, your face is this way, so this must be up. And by the third day, they're in there doing somersaults, having a good time. This in the back?
What was going through your head when you were launching and coming back?
What was in my head when I was launching and coming back? I think my first flight, I just wanted to get there. I had trained for 7 years, and I just wanted the thing to launch, and I was just sort of trying to remember the experience. My second and third flights were after Challenger, so I was a little bit more aware of the risk. So, I said a couple little prayers on the way to orbit on those. Coming home, you realize that there's fire out there, but you know, you don't feel it inside, so it was just kind of like a light show. You know, I had trained a lot. I had heard other people say what their flights were like, so you know, I was kind of well prepared for it. Yes?
Do you have any suggestions and or advice for a girl/woman who wants to go into a scientific field like that and be a part of NASA and space program?
The question is advice for young people or young woman who wants to go into science and become part of the space program. First of all, I'll tell you that you don't have to go in space to be part of the space program. So I would advise anybody to study what they really love. People ask me, should I study this or should I study this? And I said, study what you like. Because chances are you're not going to be an astronaut, may not even be in the space program. So pick something that you want to do the rest of your life that you just find is fascinating. And that will show in your ability to make good grades, to study hard, and so certainly get an advanced degree. But there are scientists who work on all kinds of aspects of the space program. And there are more and more women getting in, women in leadership positions at NASA, women engineers, women scientists, women astronauts. So, you know, the world is wide open for women now. So, good luck. Yes? With the glasses? Yes.
Which space shuttles did you fly on?
Which space shuttles? My first flight was on Discovery. My second two were on Columbia. I got to see Columbia's first launch in 1981. I was down for STS-1, the first launch of the shuttle. I happened to be at Columbia's last launch before it was destroyed on re-entry. And she took me to space twice and brought me safely home. So that was my favorite. Yes, in the back?
How old are you?
That's okay. Because I think I'm pretty well preserved. I'm 68 years old, and I flew in 1985, so I was 37 years old when I first flew. But there's no age range for astronauts, believe it or not. As long as you've got the education and the experience, you can get in, and then as long as you can pass the physical, you can stay in. So, yes?
Can you tell us about the food and beverages that you ate in space?
The food and beverages. People want to know, do we take Tang? No, we take Tang-like stuff. The drinks come in a foil package with a straw in it, and you put water in and hydrate it like you would Kool-Aid. The interesting thing about the straw is that the straw has a clip on it that would close it off, because we found that the liquid would crawl out the straw if you didn't have a clip on it. So you would undo the clip, take a sip, clip it back up so it wouldn't leak. The food packages, there are a lot of dehydrated foods like you might take on a camping trip. The shuttle in particular used hydrogen and oxygen to generate electricity, and as a byproduct it did water, so there was plenty of water up there. So we took dehydrated foods. We also took some of the military meals ready to eat, like soldiers have in the field. We took those. We took some fresh food, apples and things that would last a few days on orbit. Took tortillas instead of bread, because bread has lots of crumbs, so we could fly the tortillas like Frisbees. But peanut butter, take a jar of peanut butter, take some packaged foods, cookies and things like that. So we got to sample the foods ahead of time so we could design our own menu. So, yes, the young lady right there.
How does gravity work?
How does gravity work? Oh, that's a physics question, and I'm a physician. Gravity works by the motion of the Earth and its core. And you're going to have to ask somebody a lot smarter than I am. But we do have gravity here. Some of the other planets have gravity. Mars has about 1/3 of our gravity. If you've seen people that landed on the moon, it has 1/7 of our gravity. And so they could hop around instead of walking. So it's a very interesting sort of thing, and I'm not entirely sure. And if I did, it would probably be too long an answer. Yes, back here.
So did you only get to fly with your husband at one time?
That was on the zero-G plane. That was not in space. We did not get to fly together. There was an unwritten rule, especially if you had children, that they wouldn't put both of you on one flight. Yes, sir.
Can you speculate on the future of NASA?
Oh gosh, speculate on the future of NASA. That's a tough one, a really tough one. You know, people say, has NASA lost its vision? NASA hasn't lost its vision, it has lost its funding, okay? So having the will to fund it properly will allow us to do anything and everything. But people in Congress and the President have to decide where their focus is. If it's not on science and exploration, it's on something else, then NASA will continue to be underfunded. It will try to use its funding in a way that gives the nation its most benefit. You know, the shuttle program, the Apollo program, all pushed technology. All those things that are designed to help people get into space are things that we use here on the ground. The things we put into space, I mean, you know, now I can you know, get to Franklin by looking at a map on my phone, and that's because of the satellites that NASA has put into space. So, you know, it takes money. I think that we would really, really like to go to Mars. It may be that we will go to the moon first. Maybe there will be sufficient funding to get to the moon. We kind of know how to do that. They're designing a large booster rocket that would get us both to the moon and eventually to Mars. They're developing the crew capsules that would enable us to do that. So they're working on things right now that are just really engineering things. Certainly the commercialization of space is coming along, and I think they will be contributors for wherever we go. And take tourists. You may be, your children or even you may be able to buy tickets to go into space for a short period of time. So who knows? I'm going to have to break. It's 2 o'clock, and we're going to do some book signings for those of you who'd like to read the whole story. I will be happy to autograph a first edition space book for you. Thank you. I'm not going to sit down until you do.
Hello, I'm Dolores Greenwald, Director of the Williamson County Public Library.
Hi, my name is Stacy Parrish and I work in the Children's Department at WCPL.
You know, Stacy, things are different here in the library and in our schools. Learning's different, teaching is different, and testing is very different. Technology is essential.
Absolutely, yes, things are different. Technology is key to how kids learn, and schools use carts on wheels or cows to feed, store, and move this equipment from classroom to classroom.
I understand our students need more devices and cows in their classroom.
That's right, Dolores, and WCS created the Milk Challenge as a fun way to move our community to help feed our cows. And you know that one fed cow equals 30 new devices stored in one cart on wheels. Here's how you take the challenge. Make a donation to our schools, enjoy some milk or milk substitute, and challenge someone to do the same thing. Record your challenge and WCS will post it on their social media wall.
All right, I'm ready. Here's my donation to the campaign. And now I hereby call on local author Robert Hicks to take the Milk Challenge and help feed our cows.
Here's my donation to the campaign, and I call on local author Donna O'Neill Willoughby and all other local writers to take the Milk Challenge and help us feed our cows.
Stacy, are you ready to move on?
Oh, that's cheesy. Ready when you are, Dolores.
Be nice.
And invest now.